Welcome back, everybody, and today we'll be discussing the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, also known as the right to bear arms, states that a well regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. This one sentence probably creates the most controversy in our country today. Looking back, the Anti Federalists, fearing a tyrannical government such as that which they had under King George III, demanded a protection so that the newly formed government couldn't wrest full power away from the states or its citizens. Today, we no longer focus on a well regulated militia, but on the right to bear arms aspect of this amendment. And there's only one group that can change the interpretation since our founding fathers are no longer with us, and that would be the Supreme Court. Today we're going to take a closer look at 5 cases that shaped the Second Amendment. Let's begin with the first case, the United States versus Cruikshank. It wasn't until 1876 that the nation's highest court heard a case on the Second Amendment. So think about that, from 1791 until 1876. And of course, that case involved the KKK and state rights. After the Civil War, the South and the entire nation went through what was known as the Reconstruction period. In 1870, the United States passed what was known as the Enforcement Act, which was aimed at mobs and mob violence, more specifically the Klan, from blocking blacks from having their constitutional rights. Well, in 1873, a mob of white residents who were known to collaborate with the KKK formed their own group of domestic terrorists and called themselves the White League. They murdered an estimated 100 African Americans who had occupied the state house. 3 of these terrorists were charged with violating the Enforcement Act, specifically preventing black citizens from 1. Assembling peacefully, 2. Exercising their right to vote, and 3. Denying blacks the right to own or carry firearms. But the court ruled that the Second Amendment only applied to federal government from infringing on the rights of its citizens from bearing arms, since they had protected themselves from tyranny. Therefore, the federal government could not block an individual who took arms away from other individuals. Only the local municipalities could do that. Yes, they were set free. Our second case comes out of Illinois, and this is Presser versus Illinois. Herman Presser was part of an armed citizen workers militia in Cook County, Illinois. This socialist group, who was led by Presser, marched through the streets of Cook County in 1879, carrying their weapons. He was subsequently found guilty of having an illegal militia. According to Illinois law, the only recognized militias were state-approved, the federal army, or the governor who approved them. Presser disagreed. He believed the Second Amendment protected his ability to form a militia and that the First Amendment allowed them to peacefully assemble with their purpose. The Supreme Court disagreed and said that the federal government cannot limit well regulated militias, but state governments could. And of course, when you talk about state governments and state rights, you're going to focus on what we'll learn about soon enough is the 10th Amendment. I know we jumped right into this lesson today, but one thing that hasn't been mentioned to this point in all the court hearings to this point was that what is a weapon? What defines a weapon? Weapon technology would explode at the start of the 20th century, but it would be none other than Al Capone and the Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929 that would change what we think about weapons. The mob's fascination with weapon technology, specifically machine guns or Tommy guns and sawed off weapons, created a need to change the law. It also sparked the debate from militia to personal gun ownership when not affiliated with law enforcement or the military. In response, in 1934, the federal government passed the National Firearms Act, which imposed taxes and new restrictions on registration laws on certain kind of guns, such as the machine guns and sawed-off shotguns that I mentioned earlier. Its purpose was for revenue and to limit the spread of these types of weapons that were being used in gang activities and crimes. And that leads us to our third case, United States versus Miller. Jack Miller was convicted of carrying an unregistered sawed off shotgun across state lines, which, of course, is one of the restricted weapons under the 1934 NFA. The Supreme Court said, in the absence of any evidence tending to show that possession or use of a sawed off shotgun has some reasonable relation to the preservation or efficiency of a well regulated militia, we cannot say that the Second Amendment guarantees the right to keep and bear such an instrument. This ruling is important because it gives the federal government the right to regulate arms. So these first three cases from 1791 to 1939 were more about state rights versus the federal government. The wording changes from the focus of the militia to the right to bear arms and individual rights to defend oneself. It began when the federal government began collecting taxes on guns and filing federal firearms paperwork on all guns owned by individuals. The federal government then gave this information to the states, who in turns began to prosecute their citizens for the types of guns that they had in their homes. It wasn't until 1968 that the Supreme Court recognized this was a violation of a person's Fifth Amendment, which prohibits and protects self incrimination, or the act of telling on yourself. It wouldn't be a topic of guns if we didn't mention the National Rifle Association. In 1977, the National Rifle Association, or NRA, shifted their agenda from hunting, conservation, and marksmanship to individual gun ownership and a narrower interpretation of the Second Amendment. This became known as the Revolt at Cincinnati and shifted the organization from a club to more of a political powerhouse. So, the District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008 found that restrictive gun regulations were an infringement on an individual citizen's right to bear arms for lawful self defense. You see, the District of Columbia forbid its residents from owning any type of handguns, sort of like what Chicago will try to do, and of course, that's what we're going to talk about now. It's kind of ironic that three of the cases that we talked about all stem from Illinois, almost all from Chicago as well. But this next case, McDonald versus Chicago, which is our last case, found that the Second Amendment rights could not or should not be limited by state governments, since Chicago had put in laws and regulations to prevent its citizens from owning handguns. And of course, the Supreme Court said that's illegal. So, what happened to these militias? After the Civil War, the National Guard took up state protection, which put the term militia away. Then, in the 1920s and 30s, the discussion by lawmakers focused on what makes a well regulated militia and what kind of guns should or shouldn't be protected under the Second Amendment. More recently, the late Justice Scalia was quoted saying that self protection is not limitless. If we look at the number of gun deaths in the United States, which is slightly down because of this pandemic, it's currently around 14,000 murders from firearms. And this does include police shootings, which, when a suspect is killed, that is considered a murder. In 2018, we had just under 19,000 murders. And although the 2019 data has been released, it does fluctuate still because of pending cases. But 2018 is at 19,000 murders. If we take a look at the number of suicides, and last year in 2019, there were 24,500 suicides by guns. That's almost 45,000 gun deaths per year. And with a population of 330 million, that comes out to 1 in every 7,333 people who are affected by gun violence. Now, we're going to stop today for the video. Most of what I have is for discussion purposes, and if you're in VOLA, then unfortunately you'll miss out on these discussions. But I will post any discussions that we have from class, from our Zoom meetings, that if you did want to fast forward to this point, you could, and then hear any other discussions that we had within class. All right, Mount Pleasant, have a great day. Stay safe.